Have you ever thought about memory? Where it comes from? I mean, sometimes young kids say things, specific things that make you pause, things they couldn't possibly know from this life. It makes you wonder, are there memories beyond what we usually think of as, well, us? Today, we're diving deep into a story that really sits at the heart of this question, the Pollock twins. You brought us some fascinating material on this.
We did, yes. And our mission here really is to unpack the details of this Pollock case. It's quite famous in certain circles. We'll look at the research around it, especially Dr. Ian Stevenson's work, and then think about what it all might mean, for how we understand memory, consciousness, maybe even life after death. We're sticking close to the sources you gave us.
Okay, so let's set the scene. It starts, sadly, with a real tragedy in Hexham, England. We have John and Florence Pollock, and they had two young daughters, Joanna, who was 11, and Jacqueline, just 6 years old.
A normal family living their lives.
Exactly. But then, on May 5th, 1957, something truly awful happened. A car accident.
A terrible accident.
And both girls, Joanna and Jacqueline, were killed. The grief. Well, you can only imagine how devastating that must have been for John and Florence. It's the backdrop to everything that follows.
Absolutely. A profound loss. But then, about a year later, things took a very unexpected turn. Florence found out she was pregnant again.
Right. And on October 4th, 1958, she gave birth. Not just to one baby, but twin girls.
Jennifer and Gillian.
And this is where it gets, well, strange, right? Because even though they were identical twins, apparently they had different birthmarks.
Yes, quite distinct. And Jennifer's were particularly notable.
Tell us about those. The sources highlighted them.
Well, Jennifer had a mark on her waist, and it supposedly matched quite precisely a birthmark that Jacqueline, her deceased older sister, had.
Wow.
And there was another one. On her forehead, Jennifer had a mark that looked very much like a scar Jacqueline had gotten from a fall.
That level of physical detail is,
Yeah.
well, it's hard to just brush off as coincidence, isn't it?
It certainly made people take notice, including Dr. Stevenson later on. And it wasn't just physical marks. As the twins got a bit older, behavioral things started happening.
Like what?
So the family moved away to Whitley Bay when the girls were tiny, just infants. But when they were about 2, the family moved back to Hexham.
Okay.
And almost immediately, the twins started asking for toys. Not just any toys, but specific toys that had belonged to Joanna and Jacqueline.
Toys they had never seen. The parents had presumably put them away.
Exactly. They'd never seen them. And yet, they knew about them, described them.
That's eerie. And didn't they also know their way around Hexham? Even though they hadn't lived there since they were babies.
That's another striking detail, yes. They'd point out landmarks, places their older sisters would have known, the park, a specific school, things they seemingly had no way of knowing about.
So you have the birthmarks, the toys, the knowledge of places.
And perhaps the most disturbing part, their reaction to traffic.
Ah, yes, the cars.
They would apparently become terrified if they saw cars moving towards them, panic-stricken.
Shouting things like,
"The car is coming to get us!" Real terror. It's a chilling echo of how their sisters died.
it really points towards, well, something beyond just childhood imagination, doesn't it? Some kind of deep-seated fear or memory.
It certainly raises that question very powerfully. But then, interestingly, the sources say these memories, these behaviors, they started to fade.
Right around age 5.
Yes. After they turned 5, it seems these unusual recollections and fears diminished, and they reportedly went on to live, pretty normal lives.
Leaving this bizarre period behind them. It's such a concentrated burst of strangeness.
It is, and it's exactly these kinds of strange, concentrated bursts that caught the attention of Dr. Ian Stevenson.
The psychologist. He spent decades on this, didn't he?
He really did. 40 years dedicated to investigating cases like this, cases suggesting reincarnation primarily in children.
And he wasn't just collecting stories casually. He published significant work, like his 1987 book, Children Who Remember Previous Lives, A Question of Reincarnation. The Pollock case was in there, wasn't it?
It was one of the key cases, yes. That book was important because it laid out his findings from numerous cases, but also his methodology. He was trying to be systematic, scientific about it.
And his method involved investigating thousands of these claims.
Thousands, yes. A lot of his work, as you mentioned earlier, was in Asia, India, Sri Lanka, places like that, where belief in reincarnation is more common.
Why focus there?
Well, Stevenson's reasoning was that in cultures where reincarnation is an accepted belief, parents might be less likely to dismiss or discourage a child talking about a past life. They might actually listen or even encourage them to remember details.
which might make it easier to gather the information, I suppose.
That was his thinking, yes. It created an environment where the spontaneous claims were perhaps more likely to be voiced and recorded.
And he specifically zeroed in on children. Why children? Wouldn't adults remembering past lives be just as compelling?
That's a really good question. Stevenson had a clear reason for focusing on young children, usually between the ages of 2 and 5 or 6. He believed they were less likely to have absorbed enough information from, books, movies, or conversations to construct a detailed, fake past life story. Their knowledge base is smaller.
Right, less chance of contamination, so to speak.
Exactly. Less chance of what's called cryptomnesia, where you unconsciously plagiarize something you've read or heard, believing it's your own memory.
Ah, okay.
Stevenson found that adult claims were much more susceptible to this. He gave an example, didn't he? About a hypnotized woman.
Oh yeah, the one who remembered being a courtier for Richard II.
That's the one. Under hypnosis, she gave all these details about 14th century court life. Sounded amazing.
Until
it was discovered she'd read a historical novel set in Richard II's court years before. And, well, the details matched the novel, not necessarily historical facts.
So the memories weren't past life memories, but forgotten novel memories resurfacing.
Precisely. And that's the kind of thing Stevenson felt was less likely, though not impossible, with very young children describing specific people, places, and events from a recent past that could potentially be verified.
It really highlights the challenge, though. How do you tell the difference between a genuine anomaly and just imagination or misremembering?
It's incredibly difficult. Stevenson's approach involved meticulous verification, interviewing witnesses, checking historical records, looking for correspondences between the child's statements and the life of the deceased person they claimed to be, often trying to do this before the families had met or exchanged information.
Trying to close off loopholes.
Trying to, yes. Though critics always pointed out potential weaknesses, like the possibility of subtle coaching or information leakage.
Of course. But beyond this scientific investigation, the idea of reincarnation itself.
Yeah.
It clearly holds a certain appeal for people, doesn't it? John Pollock, the twins' father, came to believe in it.
He did. And it's a core belief in major world religions like Hinduism and Buddhism. It offers a framework for understanding life, death, suffering, and perhaps a sense of continuity.
Maybe comfort, too. The idea that life isn't just a one-shot deal, or that you don't face some kind of eternal judgment immediately after.
That's certainly part of the appeal for many, yes. And Stevenson's work, cases like the Pollocks, they tap into that deep human interest in what lies beyond our single lifespan.
And it's not just a historical footnote either. You mentioned research is still ongoing.
That's right. The Division of Perceptual Studies at the University of Virginia, where Stevenson worked, has continued this line of research for, well, over 50 years now. They keep investigating new cases.
Wow. So it's still an active field. And the Pollock twins aren't the only famous case. Our sources mentioned another one, James Leininger.
Ah, yes. The boy who remembered being a pilot. That's another frequently cited case, though perhaps more anecdotal in some ways.
Tell us a bit about that one. He was born much later, right?
Yeah.
In the late 90s.
Yes. James Leininger, born in 1998, started having terrible nightmares about a plane crash when he was only 2.
Just 2 years old.
And he started saying he was a pilot, a World War II pilot who'd been shot down. The striking thing was the level of detail he apparently knew about WWII aircraft.
Things a toddler wouldn't normally know?
Exactly. Specific plane types, technical details. His parents weren't WWII buffs or anything, so it wasn't obvious where he'd picked it up. His father, in particular, investigated the claims and eventually identified a pilot whose life seemed to match the details James provided.
It's another one of those stories that makes you just scratch your head. Young kids with knowledge they shouldn't have.
It really is. And the Pollock twins, James Leininger. They're just some of the more well-known examples out of thousands that researchers like Stevenson looked into. They all point to this same puzzling phenomenon.
Okay, so let's pull this together. We've journeyed from this really heartbreaking tragedy in the Pollock family.
A truly awful start.
Through the birth of Jennifer and Gillian and all those uncanny details, the birthmarks, the toys, the knowledge of Hexam, that fear of cars.
Really specific, verifiable points in many cases.
And then we looked at Dr. Ian Stevenson, his decades of research trying to document and understand these cases, focusing on children, comparing them to other claims like James Leininger.
It's a huge body of work trying to grapple with something that frankly doesn't fit neatly into our standard scientific models of memory and consciousness.
So thinking about you, our listener, why does this matter? If these stories, if Stevenson's research points towards something real, what does it mean?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? If reincarnation or something like it is actually happening, it completely reframes our understanding of who we are. Is consciousness tied only to this brain, this body?
Or can it persist? Can memory exist outside the brain?
Can identity carry over? These cases force us to confront those fundamental questions. They challenge the idea that you are just the sum of your experiences in this one lifetime. Maybe memory is bigger, more mysterious than we think.
It's a radical thought. And it leads to one final idea, something for the sources for you to think about. If our loved ones, people we've lost, if they could, as one source put it, come back to us as someone else,
Right.
how would that change things?
How would that change how we view grief or loss?
Or connection? Does connection end with death? Or could it potentially echo across lifetimes in ways we don't understand?
A profound thought to leave things on. Does our connection somehow endure beyond the physical?